Let me invite our panel members to come and join me so that we can further our conversations. Jacqueline Burris, would you like to come and join me? You're a Professor of Innovation and Communication, Head of the Science Section at the Athena Institute, the Faculties of Sciences at the Free University of Amsterdam.
Thank you so much.
Magda Klebus, you were referenced several times yesterday in Pierre's speeches from FPR as the person going out there and finding new and interesting partners. Julian Isla, from the Scientific Director of the Dravet Syndrome European Federation. Lucia Monaco, the Chief Scientific Officer for the Telethon Foundation. Sue Pavitt, Director of TCRU, the Dental Translational Clinical Research Unit at the University of Leeds, and also UPATA UK. And Eileen Penman, member of the Research Participant Panel of the IMI EPAD project, the European Prevention of Alzheimer's Dementia Consortium. Welcome. So we have a range of excellent expertise here on the table, and maybe we should pick up some of the challenges you left us with. And I think you invited us to step outside the comfort zone and said, it's not engagement if it's comfortable. Everyone needs to do something differently. They need to be listening, asking the right questions, and one of the areas is, who's responsible, who takes the leadership for this. But perhaps I'd like to pick up on the challenge you showed us that you've been involved in 3 iterations of research agendas, and the number one patient priority was not being picked up. So let me start by passing that straight over to Jacqueline, because I know that you have been through this process on many occasions, the setting of research agendas. What can you share with us about your experience of how patients are involved, and has it changed over time?
Well, actually, it's not unique at all. Initially, when we started in 2004, actually the Dutch Lung Fund was one of the very first to set a research agenda with patients. And they did it very nicely, also including health professionals and researchers, so we could immediately see the difference between the agendas before they made a joint agenda. And first of all, patients do bring up other topics than health professionals and researchers. There is overlap, but in many exercises we have done, we see that picture that patients do come up with very unique topics. In this case, it was fatigue, but also comorbidity, which was a very important topic. With patients, with burn survivors, it was, for example, itching. That was a very important topic. But also, indeed, pain and other issues that are relevant to patients. So we do see very much that unmet needs are being identified. And especially that's the knowledge that patients bring in, which of course complements that. It's also nice to know when they do agree with the others, when they do agree with researchers and health professionals. But of course the interest is in these new topics, when they identify gaps in research. Now then you're interested, if we know how to do it, that's step 1. But what happens with the agendas? And we see many times, we did an evaluation study on the Dutch agendas that had taken place. That was 3 years ago we did that, and all the agendas before that we analyzed. We analyzed what was the implications of those. Were they implemented, these agendas? Well, we came to the conclusion that first of all, quite a number of these agendas were never implemented at all. Basically because they were not in line with the research agendas where the funding took place. So it was on the table, but actually the agenda by the researchers had already been set. So yes, sorry, too late. In other instances, we saw that issues of patients were sidelined because they were said, well, oh yeah, comorbidity, yeah, interesting, but it's a hype. So it was actually not taken on board. In other instances, we did see that there was a genuine listening to the issues of patients. They were taken on board on the agenda. There was a funding agency actually willing to spend money on it, and no research proposals came in. So actually what we saw is that, then you may wonder, what is happening there? Why are researchers not picking up on these topics? Even if they, in a joint dialogue, were saying, yes, patients are right. So there's something else going on as well. So we looked more into the way the research system was organized. And then you see that researchers face quite a number of challenges in going into innovative areas. Basically, our research system is pretty conservative. Although we think it is, it's top-notch research, very innovative, it's not. It's about avoiding risk because you want good publications in top-notch research journals. You want funding. If there's too much risk to it, it's difficult. At the same time also, it's not necessarily good for your career. And you also don't really know often where to start. And that means that many researchers don't try to propose a project. That means that research funding organizations actually need to go out there together with patients to stir up the research community to come up with research proposals. And that's what they did in the Burns Foundation. There they took together with the Health Research Council, with companies, with I think GlaxoSmithKline was involved in that one, together with patients' organizations, coming together. But this was actually 6 years after the research agenda was set. And then only it was taken further.
So you've identified for us very nicely the life cycle of developing research ideas and agendas and then funding, and where some of the gaps are. Maybe perhaps I'll turn now to you, Julian, because you are the Chief Scientific Director for a specialist organizations around the disease. Do you recognize some of these messages that it's hard to get these issues taken up, and then when they do, matching the funder's priority to the needs of the families?
Yes, absolutely. I'm representing a patient organization from rare diseases. And in rare diseases, this problem is even more relevant because of the number of patients we have. But let me ask to the audience as well about leadership in the process. So my question is, who is the leader? Who is making the strategic decisions in order to find new treatments, in order to find new therapies for patients? Who is the leader? Who is taking the leadership? It can be national authorities, can be European authorities, worldwide authorities. Who is doing this role? Because from my point of view, I guess we are living a change when the patient organizations, our citizens, are starting to take this lead. More and more. In Europe, we have very good examples of institutions already embracing this change and facilitating the patients the possibility of really being involved on drug development and treatment development. And a good example is the European Medicine Agency, because a lot of years ago, they decided to put patients in the scientific committees. I don't know how many years ago the IMI decided to make this change, but it was super significant because right now we have patients voting on scientific committees. This is a big change, and it's totally advanced compared with the FDA or compared with the situation in most of the national countries where the voice of the patient is just people in the table.
Okay. Let me now turn to Lucia. In your experience in Italy, some of these challenges that Jacqueline has described to us, the gaps between when the agenda is made, the timing doesn't match with the availability of funds or their priorities or even the interests of researchers themselves who have to think about their careers. What's your experience?
Well, my experience comes from a charity, the Teleton Foundation in Italy, that is funding and supporting research for rare genetic diseases. And so this is a privately run organization that is trying to fill a gap that exists in Italy of public funding on rare diseases. And so we've become an authoritative organization in our country, and I believe also abroad for that. But dealing with rare diseases, you have to deal with a vast amount of very different diseases, about 7,000. Great diversity in the problems of each disease, great diversity in the tools that science can use to address the disease. And so there is a big limitation in funding. We live out of a fundraising from our fellow citizens to address these diseases, a big limitation in knowledge that needs to be encouraged and built through basic research. And so the first questions that patient organizations and patient and families ask us is, why are you not funding research on my disease? So since we received a very strong mandate from patients, and our organization was born because patients wanted it to exist. So we return all of our results and outcomes to the patients in a way that is can be used by patients. We build all of our reports around three concepts. One is out of the dark. So any improvement in knowledge will bring some light on the life of a patient. The second one is cure. Of course, this is our final goal, to find a solution. The third one is quality of life. So even if the cure is not there, you can improve the quality of life thanks to research. And the gaps there are enormous to be bridged, and patients are playing a very, very important role in all of these three sectors. So in the bridging the gap of knowledge, research can be done on rare diseases, for instance, if you have biological samples to start with, where you can do your research on. And these are extremely precious samples because these, in many cases, are extremely rare diseases. And so patient engagement in biobanking is fundamental, and we have a number of agreements with patient organizations for the biobanking activities we support. In the care section, patient engagement, it has been already mentioned, is so important to design the path. So building a clinical trial needs patients to be there from the very beginning. And for example, in our institute in Milan that is engaged in clinical trials in gene therapies, we recently started a clinical trial on beta thalassemia, and we engaged patients from the beginning, first of all to explain them why being recruited to a gene therapy clinical trial is important for a disease that is not any longer life-threatening, but it's very burdensome for the life of a patient and of the family. And that was so productive in designing the informed consent together, so that when the trial was ready, the patients already knew what they needed to know in order to be engaged and recruited to the trial, but also to get aligned on the final outcome measures of the trial. So for a scientist, the outcome measure can be very different from a significant outcome measure for a patient. And if we move to the field of neuromuscular diseases, for instance, a scientist will be excited to see under the microscope some biochemical or physiological activity that is taking place in the cells of the patients, But the patient says, hey, for me, it's important, I can't walk anymore, but for me it's important that I can raise my hands and drink a glass of water unaided. That is an outcome measure that is important for me. And clinicians should think of that when they design their clinical trial. And the third sector that is improving quality of life, that is so important that when a treatment is not available, you take care of the best standards of care that are available. And so you provide access to patients to what is available, spreading knowledge and bridging gaps that, as it was just mentioned, in Italy, for instance, exist because treatment and care from the health systems takes place at the regional level. So if you are a patient from Genova or from Trento or from Bari, you could have a totally different experience in having access to this. And so working with patients in order to make this possible and also being advocates with policymakers is an important challenge for us.
Thank you for that. And I'll turn now to Magda, because you left us with this point that engagement with policymakers about this issue of the role of patients, listening to them and making sure their assessment of an improvement is taken into account. Now, Magda, you spend a lot of time in conversation with policymakers, talking about shaping research agendas, highlighting priorities, etc., in your role for FPA, which is a trade body. How would you add on to this conversation?
Yeah, maybe I first comment on the strategic research agendas, because I think that we are sitting on the side of those writing them. So I'm really interested in everything I hear. Let's remember that for big endeavors like IMI, and I would like also to bring that a little bit back to IMI since we are here in that context. For an endeavor like IMI, we are talking about a research agenda for 10 years of research. How much can you foresee for 10 years without limiting yourself? And making sure that anything that emerges, and that is a need that emerges, from whomever, from patients, from researchers, from new technology and science, is taken into account. When the strategic research agenda in IMI was set in 2013, and we've started already discussions in 2012, and IMI 2 started in 2014, 2 years of consultations have taken place. Many people have contributed to that, including patients' organizations. And very interesting point, everybody was asking, why isn't my disease in it? Or why isn't this particular endpoint in it? And on purpose, we've set an agenda that is broad enough so that when we set the annual plans, we can actually open up for any unmet need that would be brought to us. But then question comes, are these brought to us? And I would say, many people complain, in IMI, you industry set the agenda, nobody else can come and set the agenda. Well, anybody can come and tell us what matters and what should be addressed. But this is not happening much, I should say. So it is a bit of a waiting. Everybody is waiting and expecting that the industry would one way or another second guess what the society wants. Come society, tell us, because we need to listen to your voice. And there are mechanisms for doing that, and I would really like to encourage everybody to do that. Agenda setting 10 years in advance, I'm not surprised that some of them just are not realized, because they become irrelevant after a certain time, and they are rarely revised and reviewed and adjusted. But we are working in IMI on an annual basis, and you heard yesterday a lot of ideas of projects that would be coming. Tell us, what does matter for you? It is time to say it now. Don't wait until everything is published, done and dusted. Anybody can contact IMI, anybody can contact FPA. So I would just like to stop here on the agenda setting, because I think that the strategic research agendas and the research agendas in general may just be pieces of paper if they are not people like all those here who actually want to do something, that regularly come back and make sure that the needs are being injected into research projects and project proposals. Now, on your question to me, what a trade association like ours is doing on patient engagement and on patients, I would say there are two things that we can do. The first one is to normalize relationship between industry and patients' organizations, because there is always a suspicion that there is something rotten there. Let me be very blunt about it. And I think it's not a surprise to anybody. So it is important to, in the myriads of codes of practice of what you can not do, because this is mostly what codes of practice and codes of compliance are about. They say what you cannot do. It was very important to us to finally come to an agreement of what you can do within in that environment in terms of engaging, having dialogue together. And I'm very proud to announce that a very important document has just been published on the FPA website. It's called Working Together. It has been co-created with patients' organizations, with industry colleagues, and that's one of the things that we can do, is to just make sure that we understand how to navigate the current environment without creating conflicts, but understanding each other and having that continued dialogue. But there is something more. While the decision to engage into research processes would belong to every individual company, there are things that a trade association like ours can do in order to facilitate that. So first, to help removing barriers in interpretation of codes of compliance, codes of conduct, for example. There are many perceptions. You know, if you go to your lawyers, they would always tell you 100 reasons why not to do something. Yeah? Same for research, by the way. Lawyers in the room from start, very important, but be mindful that they may tell you why not. But we can do through IMI projects that would help developing tools. And that's what we do here. So I would like just to say, every project that was mentioned today, very important. I would like to mention UBioPred, Prefer, Adapt Smart. All of them are very important. They develop tools to help companies to engage. So removing barriers, helping to engage.
Thank you. Maybe I'll now come to Sue, because you are linked to you, Patty, but also your title is looking at translational and clinical research, and that's quite an interesting idea. We've talked about the two patient-centered interventions, talked about the need to take into account the full experience of families and the quality of life issues. What can you tell us about your experience based in the university?
Okay, so I think picking up from the policy, we're generating research, and one of the big flaws is getting the research out back to the community at the end of it. So I work across a lot of disease areas, multiple sclerosis, but I sit in a dental school. But that's actually quite helpful today, because all of you have got a mouth and you've all got teeth. So this isn't something that means that you can't take part. So put your hand up if you cleaned your teeth this morning. Okay. Exemplary behaviour. But when I go out to the very poor communities around Leeds, first of all, the population in the UK, 14% of it now is black and minority ethnic groups. Very poor communities we see around the inner cities. Rarely ever do we see those represented in our patient public involvement groups. So we wanted to get out and get to the very crux of where our problem was. So the policymakers in the UK all know that if you're meant to brush your teeth twice a day, there'll be a bit of a debate whether it's before or after breakfast, but fundamentally, twice a day, fluoride toothpaste, and you're doing a good job. When you go to these very poor communities, you find people who don't have that experience of their parents telling them what to do. They have chaotic lifestyles. It might be that mum's taking them one day to school, they go to dad the next couple of days because they're from a split family. It might be grandma doing it. Heaven knows if the toothbrush carries with them to those families, from family to house in the evening. What do we do? Now, any of you, who's got teenagers in their families? Okay. Now, I can guarantee that all of you will actually say, you can't tell teenagers what to do. So, around the Leeds area, 45% of our 12-year-olds have diseased and missing teeth. So they've not done their toothbrushing well. We got a problem because teenagers don't like being told what to do. So we thought, how can we actually tackle this? Now, the grants are finished. That's the other problem. The grant funding is finished. And I thought, well, that's not good enough. We need to still go out and do something. So we decided, we were approached by someone who was doing some work on amelogenesis imperfecta, a genetic condition, who's done some fantastic work. The teeth, when you have amelogenesis, the enamel doesn't form properly, so they get pain, they get discoloured teeth. We've done some research about bullying behaviour. Actually, it's very similar to if you've got rotten teeth and you've got missing teeth coming out. So we decided to work with Theatre Debate and do some research dissemination, taking a theatre approach of going out to school. It was a co-production. We brought pupils in from the schools that we wanted to reach out to. We asked them what was important. We had our student dentists around the table. The only way I could get some money was going to the university and saying, I'd like to have greater engagement with my students. Well, that's a joy for me anyway, and if they give me money to do it and it helps my cause, that's great. And we co-produced a piece of theatre called Don't Smile, a love story with a dental theme. Who'd have thought it? So we took it out to the audiences and embedded. It was a very slimmed down production, just 4 actors. They made a piece of theatre around texting, home education, because they were being bullied. There was some subliminal oral health messages in there about how to brush your teeth, what you do in a dental trauma. And the great thing was at the end of the play, the audience had absolutely loved it. So success, so we've done a little bit of service evaluation. But I wasn't satisfied with that. I wanted to go back and see whether a year later, whether it had made a difference. So luckily, part of the school had seen the play and part of the school hadn't seen the play. So we're actually now just analysing the data, looking at that and saying, what difference has it made? Well, the feedback has been incredible. This is one of the schools that we've done the analysis from is probably 95% Islamic girls. So we've reached a black and minority ethnic group. Those girls came to us after the play and they said, well, the head teacher approached us with them and said, the girls have really enjoyed the play. Can they do some dental research on this in the school? Well, joy, participatory research. And they've had 4 projects that they wanted to look at. They wanted to look at dental anxiety. They wanted to see how their school was different to the national average in terms of their research. They wanted to look at what toothpaste products were at home, whether people are sharing toothbrush. Do they have electric toothbrush? Do they use manual? These are actually things that the industry don't really know. But, they were coming up with these ideas, trying to do the research. The most amazing thing is going back a year later, the people that had attended the play have been able to see a huge difference in their own toothbrushing behaviour. They report that they understand how to brush their teeth. They are thinking about their younger siblings in the family and helping them brush their teeth, because that was brought out in the play. There was a debate after the play, so we can actually track, and we'll be doing some analysis on the impacts of some of the questions that were debated, the sort of complex questions about people who kind of understand that they should drink water and not sugary drinks, but then they're not quite sure what to do if it's after sport and they need a bit of energy. But the people that have been to the debate seem to better understand the concept of what to do. So a really engaging way of working with the environment and the people. But the most important thing, it's got out to a community that really needs to understand what to do about brushing their teeth, getting them thinking about it. And I think we're very poor across both the pharma industry, academia, in disseminating the fantastic research that's happening, and it just gets siloed. And the great thing we've been able to do now is bringing it full circle. There's a James Lind Alliance process in the UK. James Lind was the founder of clinical trials by doing the scurvy experiment on the boat. It's an organisation that looks at research prioritisation in the UK, and we're doing an exercise at the moment with the Chief Dental Officer and many fantastic dentists and patients sitting around the table. But 2 of the girls from Batley Girls' School are actually at that table with the Chief Dental Officer, helping decide what the research prioritisation is going to be in the future for dental research. And they're surveying their school in a poor area, black and minority, exactly the social deprivation and inequality. They are out there being our canvassers, and because they're doing it, they're the champions. People listen and they fill out the forms. And I had not anticipated this as a consequence of a small piece of research with a 20k budget has been the most inspirational thing that I've taken part in. And the impact on my students at the dental school, wanting to help out. We've got the outreach people going out across these schools and a whole load of schools, lining up to work with us. And that came from having 2 ears, 2 eyes, so the listening and the gathering of information, and 1 voice back out to them. And if we use our sensories in the right proportion, I think we learn a lot. So.
Thank you for that. What an inspiring message about how through an unusual pathway you can achieve huge impact and the ability to then feed that back up, which the university, I would imagine at Batley Girls' School, couldn't write to the Chief Dental Officer and say, can I sit at the table? But the university can be that really important bridge because you are both active in the community and sitting on these high-level meetings. So thank you for sharing that circle. Now let me turn to Eileen, because you are part of this big IMI project in an area around Alzheimer's, which of course opens up whole new issues around ethics of patient involvement and patient engagement, because you have the patient themselves, their families and carers. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Of course, I've been fascinated to hear Sue's piece. Can you hear me?
Yes, mic's on now. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Sue. That was a great way to start the day with really positive news. And I have very positive news too, because I'm here thanks to Edinburgh University. I'm part of the Edinburgh Prevention of Alzheimer's Disease, and I'm what they call a research participant. Now, put your teeth in for that one. Frankly, I'd just rather be a volunteer, but actually, when I thought about it, the way that Edinburgh are trying to use us, and the fact that they've sent me on this, shows you that, yes, we are going to be research participants. There are about 200 of us already on the programme. We started in 2015, and by the way, I'm 007. So I was 7th on the list, me and Sean, and it's been a fascinating journey, and it's interesting that a couple of people have used the navigation term, because that's what I feel. We all went for our tests, we went for our MRI scans, our lumbar punctures. Some people were apprehensive about that, obviously. Myself, I didn't worry about that, but we're all different in that respect. And that was immediately where I noticed how well the research team dealt with us all. They listened to our concerns. They appointed a doctor who was extremely hands-on, gave good explanations, made us all comfortable, and everybody had a successful lumbar puncture. Similarly with the MRI scan, the competence and the kindness of the NHS staff was terrific. They tried their best to make us feel welcome and reassured and valued. And then they went on to ask us if we wanted to create a participants panel. So a few of us are now on that participants panel. We had our first meeting, I think, in maybe October last year. And from that, I was chosen to be the representative who would go to Stockholm, which I went to in May, to the EPAD representatives meeting, where a whole lot of people from all over Europe came to talk about their experience, whether it was pharma or data or research. And then I went to a specific meeting of our panel in Edinburgh to talk about how we were going to act as a panel, because that's where the navigation comes in. You're right at the beginning, and you don't have the map. And you've kind of got to make it up together. And it was interesting that, the research on how to do this is not necessarily there, and I could see the barriers to that. But fortunately, we have a very enabling Prof, Craig Ritchie, who is very keen to give us ownership of the panel. And we also had on the panel someone who had a lot of business experience. And I actually asked him to chair the meeting rather than myself, because I didn't feel that my strengths were in that area. So he asked the very specific questions. Why are we here? Why do you want us? And what do you want us to do? And how are we going to do that? So we spent a lot of time just establishing the groundwork, setting up that map structure. And I think someone, because I don't even know who, decided that this would be a good thing for one of us, and that of course is me, to come along to and get ideas about how we can participate, how we can best do whatever you need us to do, whatever will be most effective.
Can I just ask, I mean, this about
Please
the
do.
issue of your results. So Lucia mentioned that in the research they do, it's very clear that the ownership of the data and the tissues that are submitted are the patients. You've talked about having MRI scans and lumbar punctures. Where's the ownership of that?
I don't know.
Okay, so I mean, if you came here to get ideas, one of the first ones might be
Yes.
to just clarify that important area. You're a research participant. Part of that participation has involved pieces of you,
Yes.
your data. And I think
Yes.
this issue of patient engagement,
Yes.
the ownership not just of the results, but the data and the actual physical tissues is really important. I mean, Nicola in her first speech talked about the breast cancer biobank developed, how breast cancer patients submitted blood and tissue samples for research, but retained also the right for themselves to be able to have that retested and reused a specific amount for them. I thought, what a fantastic example, where the data and the biological sample ownership is used, and you have full consent for research to be done on it as long as you as an individual benefit. And Julian, would you like to also add on that? The tech team are fantastic. They just need a second to know which microphone is being spoken into. So don't panic. It will work for you.
We are getting in panic very quick, All is about data. All is about data. If you think about digital transformation and how digital transformation is changing other industries, not health, not science, the big difference is the digital transformation and how we are transforming biological entities into data. And I guess the role of the patient is super important here. The new European regulation going to be implemented next year in May is going to give a great empowerment to the patients, because they will be able to go to the hospitals, to the doctors, to the institutions, to patient organizations as well, and ask for the data. Are we prepared to this change right now? Are we prepared to provide this data to the patients in a safety way and protect them as well of the consequences of having data used in the wrong way? Let me give you an example. I'm patient advocate because I have a son with Dravet syndrome. Dravet syndrome is a severe neurological condition. When I have an appointment with my doctor, I'm living in Madrid. In Spain, we have the same regional system you have in Italy, with different experiences. If you are living in Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, or depending of the area where you are living, you have different experience. But even worse, the systems are not connected. If I go to a doctor appointment with my son, the doctor spend most of the time typing. They don't have time to look at the patients. We are not giving to the doctors the possibility of being doctors. We are asking them to type. It's crazy. We have super experienced people after 6 years of university, internships, and they are just typing in appointments. It's crazy. But what happened with this information? The information is going into the system in plain text with no classification of symptoms, drugs, therapies, nothing. It's just plain text. But what happened if I move to another city in Spain? I'm not able to move the data with me. The data will keep on the hospital. And it's the same problem if the people is moving to another city in Europe. What happened with the data? And how we are working in order to be able, the data will be connected and be able to provide value to the other stakeholders, industry, regulator, national authorities. I guess this is the big question we have to solve, but also it's a great opportunity for patient organizations to take this leadership and make sure the data is being used in a proper way, and they are leading this digital transformation that is going to happen sooner or later.
Thank you for raising the importance of data. And I should just say that after the break, we will be talking about big data. So let's park some of the topics for that later session. Sue, you wanted to add on to this, and I'll come back to you, Lucia. There's a topic that I would like our panel to think about, which is, Jacqueline said that even when you get everything sorted out, the research agendas are aligned, and it corresponds to what the patients want, and there's a call for proposals, and no researchers submitted because we hadn't taken into account they had their conservative aversion to risk and their need to publish, etc. So I am going to want the panel to think about that. Sue.
It was just quickly to come back from a piece of work that we're doing on antimicrobial resistance, and 1 in 10 people have a reported allergy to penicillin. So we're doing a study now where we're actually going to be testing patients to see whether that is a real allergy or not. And traditionally in a clinical trial, you pull that data over into a case report form and it's kept quite separate, the clinical trial results. That would be nonsensical in this situation. So we're trying to push back with the patient voice there, saying, actually, that result has to sit in the medical records because we want it to change practice. We want them, if it is a false result, to be able to, for them to be able to have safely reintroduce penicillin for those patients. So I think it's always about pushing back all the time. Thanks.
Okay. Does anyone want to pick up on this issue about, how do we create a space to allow researchers to step out of the ordinary and respond to new topics that have been put forward, developed with patients, and there might even be funding, but they're reluctant to do it? Lucia.
I believe that a big change in the academic culture is needed, because today the typical reward and the typical currency for research are publications. So everybody relies on being able to produce and write and publish research articles. And if you move out of the comfort zone of academics, that is so risky for the personal life and career of a scientist that some topics can go unattended and unsubscribed. And so I think that patients need to be given the opportunity to voice strongly the need. But also, again, it is a policy issue. So academia should allow for other key performance indicators to be taken into account, not just publications. What we keep telling our grantees is, we want your research to be excellent. And if you are a Teleton grantee, you have gone through a very rigorous, very selective procedure through an international scientific committee. So we're pretty sure your research is really good. But that's not enough, because you're doing research because patients wanted this organization, Teleton, to exist and to support the research. And they want a return on that. So that is not enough. And in fact, in our evaluation system, we have a second score besides the scientific merit, which is literally named impact on patient. And the application gets a score on that. And we monitor the outcome to see whether the impact is there, in fact. But that is still not enough. So one way to try and steer this culture is to promote face-to-face meetings between researchers and patients. We have a biannual scientific convention, and we invite patient organizations there. And we prepare guided tours to the dedicated tours to the posters for each patient organization delegate, the posters that are dealing with their own disease. And so they meet with the scientists. And these meetings produce so much energy and mutual understanding, so that the patient understands that research, even basic research, is so important, so challenging, so time-consuming, so frustrating. By talking to these young scientists standing in front of their posters, and so they feel reassured by the fact that there is somebody working for them, even if the immediate output will be a paper. But on the other hand, scientists understand why patients want them to work. They go back to their lab and think, yes, it's important that I publish well on Nature, on Science, if possible, but also it's important that these results are relevant to the patients. And that is why I got this grant, and that is why that person talked to me and asked me, then what will change in my life if you reach your goals? So there's no perfect solution, but there are many ways that can be applied to promote this change in culture.
Thank you. In the interest of engagement, I'm going to invite, if there's anyone from the audience that has a question. Oh, lots of hands up. That's great. So let's get the microphones being passed to you. And while we're just getting the microphones come in, I had the pleasure with Anders a few years ago to visit the Champalamo Foundation brand new hospital in Portugal, and they did exactly what you were talking about, Lucia. They decided they were going to be doing research in two areas, cancer and neuroscience, and the laboratories are in the hospital, so the patients can always see the researchers, and the researchers can always see the patients, to make that strong link, so everyone knew who they were serving. So thank you for that. Let's get the mics out to the questions. Let's start over here. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, Annette Bakker, Children's Tumor Foundation. I really love this discussion, but protecting for a second the researchers. The questions that are asked by patients are difficult questions. Pain, itching, fatigue. The researchers have a hard time translating that into a lab experiment, and we've encountered that exactly in the foundation, where the research community would prefer to work on tumor shrinkage than on pain, because pain is much harder. Now, on the other hand, looking at the funding landscape for 1 second, the NIH grants have a 13% success rate, which means that researchers are kind of more or less pushed into low-risk research to make sure that they guarantee their funding. So maybe a question that I had for the panel, wouldn't it be an idea to foresee, I'm a very big believer in, if you want to have people behave in a certain way, create an incentive for them to behave like that. So wouldn't it be an idea to create a bucket of high-risk research, no guarantee for success?
Okay, thank you for that. We have questions over here.
Hi, I'm Gernot Sandhu. I'm a patient engagement specialist from Basel, Switzerland. So my question is to Jacqueline and anybody else in the panel. And my question is about co-creation. What are the facilitators and the barriers? And I'll give you my contacts. So I work in drug development, patient engagement for the last decade, and now I'm working with the School of Pharmacy who are interested in putting patient engagement approach into pharmacy delivery. And being an ex-pharmacist, I thought this is great. But what I'm finding as we are co-creating, I'm being really stretched, so is my researcher. We haven't really fallen apart yet, but I can see the stretch. One of the things that strike me is that, for example, healthcare professionals like pharmacists, we like structure, we work in a structure, we have operating systems, that's how it is. So any tips on what are the barriers and what are the facilitators so I can work together with my researcher so that we both cross this bridge and then we can start working with patients, because I'm afraid that either of us could kind of like break.
Please don't drop out. We do need you. Here, there's a gentleman behind you with a red jacket. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Patrick Mehy. I work for the Scientific Institute of Public Health in Brussels. It might be childish, but I'm a 007 fan anyway. The questions I have, I work for Advance, a IMI program on vaccination, and we have included in our scientific advisory board an NGO that represents patients. It's a Polish NGO. Despite the fact that we have really scientifically based evidence that vaccine works, we still have 20 years. I mean, the first paper that makes some fake news, as one would like to use the term, in 1999, it's almost 20 years ago, that makes some fake relation between vaccination and autism. We still have almost 20 years later, a Trump guy who's claiming that it still might be right that the relation may exist. And we have a lot of publications, we have hundreds, thousands of publications that demonstrate that there is no link between vaccination and autism, and still people are thinking that it might be the case. So that the questions I have is, we try to convince people that vaccine is the most effective preventive treatment that can be used, and despite that, we still have thousands of people, millions of people. If we look to the situation in France or Italy, it's a very good example where vaccine hesitancy is a real problem. It's not a person problem, it's a public health problem. So I'd like to ask as a questions, what do you think about vaccine hesitancy, and what would be your ideas to combat this situation?
Okay, so, and I have two more. If you could be brief so that our panel will have a chance. Three more, okay.
Good morning, everyone. Francesco Florindi from BBMRI ERIC, the research infrastructure for biobanks. I want to go back to the discussion we had before about informed consent, samples, and the role of patients. BBMRI is working on a code of conduct, so I'd say a soft law piece of the General Data Protection Regulation. That it includes, it's centered on the idea of a fair, informed consent. So we're working with patients. I'm the engagement officer, so I'm bringing the patients into this debate. My question is reciprocity. So giving back to the patients, once they've provided the samples, once they made the research possible, what are your wishes for a fair reciprocity process? This might not be possible all the time, but is it something that is really helpful to engage also the patients, bring them, make them more interested in the research we're doing? Thanks.
Thank you.
Erik Tambuizer from Biopontis Alliance. First of all, I would like to respond to Julian's question, when did patient participation actually start? It was starting with the involvement of patients in the Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products at EMEA, and it was actually the European Parliament that voted for that upon a Commission proposal. So EMEA implemented it. Secondly, I would also like to reinforce what the last speaker just said. I think the ownership of patient samples and patient data is something really to be carefully looked at, because at the moment the doctors may think that when they collect samples and data, it's their property. That happens a lot. Yeah. But on the other hand, if we go back to individual discussions, we may hamper the progress of research, especially in the rare disease area. So there has to be a solution found, and I think BBMRI is working on that, which is taking into account those two aspects, the use and the ownership, but in a way that doesn't hamper research.
Excellent, thank you. We have one more input over there, this lady behind you. Yeah.
Hi, hello, I'm Sveta Schins, the European Network for Research on Alternative Hemiplegia. I'm a biomedical scientist and a parent of a child with rare disease. So I want to comment on what Magda said, coming back to the topic of this session, IMI actually agenda on patient engagement. I think you made 2 points. What have you been doing and what is your vision about it? What I picked up is just helping patients to engage and also on the boundaries, ethical and any other boundaries, creating tools for patients. In my experience, working for 15 years on this rare disease, alternative hemiplegia in childhood, so it's very different. Industry isn't there, rare, I mean, big or small, and so I think we have very similar, of course, perspective with Julian on that. He mentioned leadership, he mentioned transformation. There's over 7,000 rare disease and many others that are not yet actually researched well and nothing is developed. And I think industry potentially should be interested in that. And the way to do that, I think pretty much was my experience, you have to set up the research agenda. I'm researchers, so I know the thinking of that. You have your comfort zone that it's very difficult to
step outside.
I think to expect researchers to get out of this comfort zone. So just the question that I have, or I just want to have discussion on that is, would IMI consider in the future, perhaps in IMI 3, moving out of this more, I think, passive engagement that we hear here. Okay, patients are here, industries here, how to get this working, this chemistry, and researchers are there. But you know that this is going on for many years already, and maybe there are just few examples, but there is enormous potential. That's what I want to say, that industry perhaps and IMI can help this chemistry together.
Okay,
thank you.
So now I'm going to ask all the members of the panel to respond on the different issues that we have had put forward. I think the rare disease questions are going to fall to Lucia and Julian, clearly. I think the IMI and industry questions are going to fall to Magda. Perhaps, Jacqueline, you might also want to respond on this issue of moving out of comfort zones and getting people, encouraging research in areas that are gapped. Perhaps the issues of ownership and use of data and samples and better forms of informed consent will come over to the sofa. And then I'll come back to Dominique to see, how you think our conversation has moved forward since the challenges you've set us. So shall we start here? Magda.
Sure, the future. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for the question. And I think that it is not just about IMI 3. It is very much about IMI in general, about how do we make research agendas, research priorities, and research topics more relevant for patient engagement. So I think that there are two things. First, we sometimes underestimate setting clearly the patient outcome in some of our projects. We are not always very clear about what would be the impact on the patient or what should be the impact on the patient. We are pushed to look into impact on society, on the research field, on economy, on the competitiveness. I think that we should be more mindful. I take mental note of that and would be looking into the projects. The second thing that is already happening in IMI and could be happening more is that we co-fund projects together with patients' charities that are coming more and more on board as associated partners to IMI and help us to set the objectives of what is really relevant from the patient perspective and put on the table those topics which make sense for them. Some of the projects on diabetes type 1, on autism, and others would not have looked as they look today if they weren't patient charities coming and co-funding, because when you co-fund, when you are part of the club, you actually have an impact on how research agenda and research topics are set. I would very much encourage us to do more of that. And then the last point about the very far future of an IMI 3, I hope there would be one. this would have to be different from today in terms of what kind of partnerships and memberships we have. We have to think it through differently. Doesn't mean completely differently, but it means we really need to think about partnerships slightly differently for the future. Thank you.
Jacqueline.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we have a glass which is about half full, depending on which part you look at it in a more positive way, or half empty. From the half full, we see that there are lots of interesting examples. We increasingly know how to do things in the different areas. We have really good practices. We know about facilitators and we know about barriers. The half empty is there because in many cases we do follow up on these, but actually do not monitor and evaluate well, and some of these things are not going well. And so even the ones that are really trying to do their best often lack, it's actually your example, you feel that you lack a certain skills of how do I do this, and do I have the resources, and can I learn from the experiences of others? And I think this exchange of good practices is very important, and we don't do enough. And then there is a lot of bad practice going on. And that's, and if you really look into many of the exercises that are taking place, and you follow the knowledge of patients, because it's actually about patient knowledge, that has to transpire into the end result, the decision that is being taken. And if you follow up on it, you often see that it's lost. Either it's not elicited well enough, and I mean that only a few voices are taken into account, because it is not active enough. And then you get a result that actually is a poor result, and you don't really harvest the knowledge of patients. And then you can say return on engagement. Well, then you cannot really show the return on engagement if actually the engagement was not really well done. And I think we have to be careful of this more tokenistic activities. And so don't be satisfied too easily because you're at the table. Because often that is because I can talk, but really look at whether or not it is taken up and in what way. So that's a kind of warning sign as well, to be not be too satisfied quickly.
Thank you. And Julian, would you like to make some comments now on the issues that were raised about the importance for rare diseases particularly?
Yeah, rare diseases in 2 minutes. I'm very familiar with the work that the IMI is doing for rare diseases because I'm delegate on patient representative observer in the Orphan Drug Committee, and I participated in different procedures in the IMI, scientific advice. We are moving, but in IMI we are giving marketing authorization for how many products for rare diseases? One per year, maybe 20 or something like that, right? Or maybe more. But, you know, look at the scale. We have 7,000 rare diseases. And every year we are giving marketing authorization for maybe 20, 30, 40. We will need 500 years to provide drugs for all the rare diseases. Well, it's not working on that way, right? But some basic maths to identify, to describe the magnitude of the problem. It's super complex. I guess rare diseases in particular, they need innovation. They need to start to do things in a different way. I totally agree with Lucia in terms that the researchers, the way we are creating knowledge as citizens has to be revisited at some point, because the researchers are really hijacked by publications. They have to publish. Just one example, in my condition, in Dravet syndrome, when we started our organization, we contacted a scientific organization in the US who owns the only mouse model for Dravet syndrome several years ago. And we asked to use this mouse model for a product we identified with one company to test if the product was working on the mouse model. And the people leading this university in the US, they told us, no way, we are not giving the mouse model to you. Because if we are giving the mouse model to you, my team won't publish. And if that happens, my team will disappear. So you know how this model is driving really bad behaviors, and this is something we need to change. I don't know why, but the opportunity, I don't know how, but the opportunity is definitely there.
Thank you, Lucia.
I would like to touch on the big issue of the participation and engagement of industries for rare diseases. And it is indeed a challenging problem because industries are for-profit organizations. They need a return on investment to stay alive. And rare diseases, and in many cases ultra-rare diseases, will never provide a return on investment per se. Luckily, I would say that the scenario is moving and is changing. IRDIRC, the International Consortium for Rare Disease Research, has more and more participants and member organizations that are industries and biotech companies. I can briefly touch on our experience as a charity. We realized that the results of our gene therapies that were developed and validated at the academic level with successful clinical trials needed an industry to reach the market. Otherwise, we would never make it with the money we had available for the development of the therapies and for undergoing the regulatory process up to marketing authorization. That happened in 2010 for one particular genetic disease, ADA SCID, that is a genetic immunodeficiency. So children had been successfully treated with one shot, one treatment of gene therapies, and children, the so-called bubble boys, were able to go to school and get a cold and get, any other common disease without consequences. But how to benefit other children at a time when the clinical trial was over, the money for the clinical trial for research was over. So we tried to engage companies, and we were fortunate to get the interest of GSK, who wanted to enter the rare disease field. And that has been and is being a challenging but very profitable alliance that brought to the first gene therapy approved by EMA for a rare disease, the Strimvelis, for this ADA SCID. What is our experience in this interaction and collaboration with the companies? First of all, you need somebody to drive the agenda. You need some facilitator, somebody who wants to pull the results out of the lab, out of the clinical trial, and push it towards the companies. That is fundamental. But second, the science and the research that it relies on must be excellent. So companies are looking for excellent research, and they will put the results under an incredibly rigorous scrutiny before they take it up. And that is important also for universities and academias when the quality of the data is good enough for publication, but not good enough and robust enough for clinical development.
Okay. Either Sue or Eileen or both, would you like to add a final comment, and perhaps particularly this issue of a sort of new ethical informed consent, a fair and informed consent process to support patient engagement? Either of you are welcome to, or just make a last comment.
Well, I was just going to come back because it come up a few times about the risk-taking for... Yes. And yesterday I was sitting at the National Institute of Health Research board where we're actually looking at the grant applications yesterday. The board does tend to be risk averse, but we have 2 patients sitting of the 20 members on that group. And there was an incident yesterday where a rare disease had come up for funding. We'd seen it 3 or 4 times. It had been kept going. We're a board that reiterates, if we don't quite like it, we say, push it back, we want this done. And yesterday, the patients actually made that fundable yesterday because they turned around and they said, there is nothing else out there for these patients. it's come in now at a reduced cost, we have to take the risk. And so that's the power that the patient can bring, but the patient needs to be at the table of the research funding bodies as well. And I think that's the really key way of getting change to happen, is that sitting at the table together throughout the whole research cycle is important.
Thank you. Would you like to add something in as well?
Thank you.
And while you're commenting, could I get the Slido poll pulled up on screen, please, so that we can hold that poll with the audience? You should have a poll which asks a question. Excellent, thank you. Go ahead, Eileen.
Thank you. I want to speak on ethical disclosure, because as yet I don't feel I know enough about it, but if I may just add on a little bit extra about communication, because that was something that the EPAD researchers have asked us all to do recently, and I've been giving feedback on their website, because their website was, as you could expect, huge tracts of academic speak, and so we talked about videos instead, and chunking and colour headers, etc. I also referred them to Alzheimer's Scotland and dementia research websites, because they are the ones that are used to interacting with the public and have been doing so for years. And their websites are terrific. Yep. They're very enjoyable to use, very informative. And yes, the group in Edinburgh have taken that on board. And we've also, as a panel, asked Prof. Ritchie if he could look at any new research that's coming out and just give us a lay summary. And he's got a good sense of humour, so I'm sure it will be readable. We're also going to be going to a conference in November, and one of the titles of one of the talks is, again, it's Craig Ritchie, and his question is, are we nearly there yet? Yeah. And another one is risk avoidance for Alzheimer's. And these are questions which, as someone who's been taking part in this for a while, I've obviously been talking to my friends. I walk with a walking group, I talk with a reading group, and these are the questions that my friends have been saying. Are we nearly there yet? And what can we do? So people are, it's very reassuring to see that the academic community are in line, or are going along the same ways as the general population, as far as I can tell from my group of friends.
Great, thank you. Dominique, I'm going to ask you to come back and perhaps have the final word. At the beginning, you asked us lots of questions, and you said, what would, the health system and the drug development process look like without patient engagement? We've had some really interesting insight from different points. Julian has told us what happens when you hit against a wall, that a university won't allow something to go forward because they don't want to lose their major incentive. We've heard other examples of good practice, making sure that impact on patients is part of the funding, and even we've heard from Sue that patients can actually drive through and overcome some of the risk averseness of the funding because they're able to put the priority there. And we asked the question that we posed, and you can see that most people feel that actually you'd be similar, the topics would be similar, but there would be different approaches. Obviously, with the interests of patients, they have a different approach, different questions to be answered. So how would you like to close this session?
That's not easy.
Not easy, yes.
Not easy. No.
It's not the end of the conversation. We have the rest of the day.
It can't be. It can't be.
About return on engagement.
I think I am happy and discontent at the same time. Because I've heard lots of things happening. I've heard lots of great investments, people getting involved, but the problem I have is it usually stays within the project. It doesn't go anywhere else. We made this wonderful UBioPred guide on how to involve patients in your research. I talk about it all the time. Nobody has ever heard about it. Nobody is using it. So we need to find a way to make it a joint problem. It's like what Gurmit says, I'm at breaking point, my partner is at breaking point. Why not talk about the problem? That's on the table. You don't have to come with a solution. You have to address the problem. The solution will come when you have an open discussion. The solutions will come if we are willing to discuss the problem, the big elephant on the table. We're all looking at small parts and forget that it's an elephant. And sometimes when I'm really frustrated, I look back to 2004, before 2004, and I think it is amazing where we've gotten within 13 years. But our major challenges are still coming. And I think we have to somehow get the conversation going at different levels, looking at what are the issues we're seeing and how can we go forward. It's the same like someone asked about, yes, but then we have the sample and we do the research, what then? Have you ever thought of communicating back to the patients who gave the samples what your research showed? So often I see researchers don't think about these simple things. It is not always higher science. Yes, we have to have good science. We have to have good conversations. But life can be way simpler than we sometimes make it. And let's go back. You need to sit on the table. You need to look into each other's eyes and start a conversation. That's the starting point. And then things start happening.
Great, thank you very much. And can we say a warm thank you to all the members of our panel.